I'm Roberto Garcia. I'm Clinical Associate Professor of International Business here in the Management Department in the Kelley School of Business. I have a PhD and an MBA in International Business. So here at the Kelley School of Business, I teach international business courses. I'm a co-director of the Supply Chain and Global Management Academy, and I'm very supportive of any programs that provide our MBA students international business experience and content. Yes, how is international business different from domestic business, or how does business differ internationally versus in the home country? There are actually quite a few big differences and important differences. The most obvious one is culture. So business takes place within a cultural context, and so there's nothing that says that the way business is done in one country is going to be exactly the same as another country. So everything from language differences to the role of government, the role that government plays in business. Countries have different economic systems, they have different political systems, and those systems have different rules of the game that affect firms in their countries. So these rules of the game are going to differ greatly between countries. There's nothing, again, that says that the rules of the game are going to be the same. Every country has its own set of laws and its own legal environment, and of course companies and managers operate within those laws. And so sometimes laws and the legal environment can create some pretty big differences for companies that are crossing borders. And of course, an area that's very important and interesting for international managers is the different ethical systems or ethical differences, different norms that exist that govern the behavior of business and relationships and interactions. And so those can create some pretty big differences and ethical issues. One way that I think about the differences is that if a particular manager is very comfortable doing business in their home country, they tend to think, okay, today we're just going to experience business as usual. So business as usual, what managers often report when they go to another country and begin doing business there is that they have to prepare for business as unusual. And so that's a good starting point. Expect that there are going to be some pretty big differences, and the really good managers then take that assumption, and they tend to be surprised, pleasantly surprised, when some things are similar. So what are some of the cultural differences specifically that would affect international managers, or that are differences in international business versus domestic business? Well, the biggest and obvious one would be the language difference. So someone needs to adapt to the country's language, or they need to, two business people from two different countries have to decide which language they're going to use. And there are a number of issues that come up there. But even when both are speaking the same language, it's, let's say, English, which a great deal of the world speaks now as a business language. That's not to say that their level of comfort and their capability in English is going to be equal or is going to be the same. And so even some terminology or an accent and speaking the same language can get in the way. And that's a pretty big cultural difference that could affect the communication and the accuracy of information and the understanding between individuals. So language is one that has many aspects to it, and that's a pretty important one. When communicating across cultures, there are some dimensions that often get in the way, or some pretty big differences. One is the status or the hierarchy in a particular country may differ from another country. So in a country like the United States, we tend to downplay titles, and we tend to treat each other pretty much as equals, even when there may be status differences within an organization or different positions in an organization. In other countries, those status differences are very important. So there may be countries where the power distance or the hierarchy is more important, and so you have to pay attention to those things. Otherwise, they could create problems or misunderstandings. In some countries, they tend to be very direct in their communication. People tend to say what they mean. In other countries, it's very difficult for people to be that direct. They see it as being anti-diplomacy, and so they take great care with what they say. And sometimes what they say isn't necessarily what they mean. It's just that they're focusing on harmony or on diplomacy. So somebody who's expecting very direct communication encounters someone who is less direct and tending toward diplomacy can be very confusing. In some countries, there's a tendency to communicate with the interests of the group in mind versus individuality. In some countries, like the United States, we tend toward individuality, expressing our own personal opinions as part of business interactions. It's very difficult in another country for people to express themselves as individuals. They see themselves as part of a collective, a part of a group, and that group mentality flavors the communication and the messages that come across. Another big difference is that countries differ on their emphasis between the importance of the task versus the importance of relationships. In countries where communication is pretty direct, people tend to emphasize and focus on the task. What is it that we need to accomplish? Getting down to business very quickly, starting the meeting very quickly, having a very strict agenda and sticking to that agenda. Those are all characteristics of focusing on the task. In other countries, it's very uncomfortable to begin focusing on the task or on the agenda before building trust or before working on the relationship part of it. And so when this type of communication happens between a country that's task-oriented versus one that is relationship-oriented, no business may actually ever take place if the two sides don't understand each other and come to some kind of an agreement, you know, what's going to be emphasized, the task or the relationship. And many times it's just a matter of what people are comfortable with and understanding those differences and then being willing to adapt in the particular situation. But culture is a deceivingly tricky issue that can create quite a few problems for international managers until they have prepared themselves and until they have some experience in doing business in multiple countries. How did the leadership team and the student team do in their Globase project in Peru? I think they did a wonderful job. I think that for a first-time program and for all of the difficult aspects that the program involved, I think that the students did very, very well. And I was very pleased with their work, both with the process and then with the end result of their work. Some things that I looked at as indicators of success were in three main areas. One was the fact that the Peruvian partner, the main non-governmental organization, the American Chamber of Commerce in Peru, was very pleased with the outcome. And even before the student teams delivered their results, AmCham was already expressing their interest to me to continue the program and to begin working on dates for the future, for a future Globase program, Globase 2010, 2011. So they were very interested in a long-term partnership. So that told me early on in our time in Peru that the students' teams had already done a very good job in managing their projects and demonstrating the value that they were adding to these companies. Of course, a very important indicator of success was the attendance at the final presentation by all of the 5 company representatives, and also the comments that these companies gave, both formally and informally. And so informally, I gathered very quickly during the final presentations that the companies were very pleased with the results. They were taking very good notes, they were asking good questions, they were very attentive to the recommendations that the students had to offer. And I also noticed that they were taking very good notes from the from the recommendations of the student teams who were working on other projects. That is, they were, when a team was presenting their recommendations for a completely different company, company A, company B and C and D were also taking good notes because they could also use those recommendations. And then, of course, during the breaks, there was a lot of interaction among the company representatives who were meeting each other for the first time and sharing their satisfaction. And, of course, I, as the faculty member, was approached by several of those company representatives just expressing how pleased they were with the work of our student teams. And they were also expressing their willingness to continue working with other student teams in the future. So that was very important. Of course, another outcome that's very important for me because of the work that I do has to do with the learning outcomes. And I was very pleased with how much the leadership team learned from this experience and how much each of those individual teams and the individual students themselves learned about international business, about tackling real-world consulting projects, and about traveling together as a group to a very different country. So in terms of those three outcomes, both the satisfaction, or including the satisfaction of our main local partner, the satisfaction of the 5 companies, and then my observation of the learning outcomes of all of the student teams and the individuals, I was very pleased with the overall results of the project, and I was very pleased with what the students were able to accomplish and what they were able to deliver as a result of this initial Globase 2009 program. An observation of how the learning process works in this type of an experience is that the learning process is multifaceted and it's a bit mysterious, and in this kind of experience it can have some short-term and long-term effects. So particularly in an international business experience, it takes a while for somebody who participates in it's a very deep learning experience with a change process. It's very difficult to understand it on the spot and to be able to verbalize it. In the short term, several of the aspects that took place in the learning take time to understand, take time to develop, and take time to be able to capture and describe. And so often, people in this type of experience may encounter something very important relating to difficulty managing cultural differences, but it may take them a while to really understand what happened and how they can use that experience to improve the situation the second time around or the third time around. So I think of this type of learning as sort of a spiral process. In the short term, you've gone around the learning spiral once, but then you need to go back a second time and a third time to really capture the benefits of it and to really understand what happened and what can be used. What made this a student-led initiative? The student-led initiative portion of the Globase 2009 experience was very important, and it's central to the learning process. So what made it student-led? From the very beginning, the idea of Globase 2009 was proposed by a group of students. It was a group of MBA students, a combination of second-year and first-year students, who proposed the idea of going to another country, using their MBA training, their previous business experience, and their knowledge that they've acquired here at the Kelley School of Business, and using that in a way to do some good in another country, right? And so from the very beginning, it was student-led because it was student-initiated. It was student-conceived. From there, as part of a certain, let's say, type of courses that we have here in the Kelley School MBA program, we have some courses that are student-led, student-initiated, and student-executed, and so we have some experience in that. So Globase was one of those where the students are responsible for doing the planning of how all of this is going to work, and then they have to be involved in the execution of it, and so they're involved in all phases of the project. Of course, with a faculty advisor overseeing their work, facilitating and helping them as a resource, and of course with the full support of the MBA program and then the rest of the Kelley faculty supporting them. But very much the focus is on them. So from proposing the initial concept, then the leadership team was responsible for designing the actual course content, the activities. They were responsible for the logistics, what travel agency was going to be used to help them actually make the travel arrangements. Working directly with the travel service providers was part of the role of the leadership team, and of course the leadership team members were all also students and members of the consulting teams of the actual work teams. So they're planning, they're executing, but they're also delivering through their work as part of a team. And again, a lot of the focus is on the students planning and the execution. The faculty member now provides more, takes more the role of the advisor or a facilitator, which is very different than in a typical classroom where the instructor would be planning the curriculum and would be guiding the discussion and pretty much managing the class. In this case, it's a student-led effort. And of course, there is course credit for that leadership involvement. Each of the students would get credit for the work involved, like in a normal class, but the leadership team gets additional credit for the leadership part, for their planning and execution part of that. It's almost like taking a separate course. So for the student leaders, it's almost like they're taking two courses, one as a regular student and then the other as a leadership team member as part of a leadership practicum. What were some of the challenges for the leadership team, and how did the leadership team do in this particular experience? Well, I must say that because of the leadership practicum that the leadership team has to engage in, or the course that they enrolled in, that's a significant learning opportunity, but that learning opportunity also comes with some pretty big challenges. One challenge that would challenge any leadership team is just planning the logistics for this. It seems easy to think we're going to go as a group or as a class to another country, and we're going to get from Bloomington, let's say, to Lima, Peru, and that seems pretty straightforward and doable. But there are all kinds of travel arrangements that need to be made. We need to get, for example, customs clearance. We have to go through an immigration process, and it's not the same for every student. There's paperwork that's required. There's advanced preparation. Somebody has to book the hotels, book all of the travel, the transportation, the airlines, the buses, travel in country, and all negotiating a different language, of course, because in Peru they speak Spanish, and that's their primary language there. And so the logistics are a pretty big challenge for the leadership team, just making the arrangements, apart from traveling as a group and always being concerned about safety and you know, traveling as a group and making sure that things go smoothly. Another aspect that can be very challenging, that is challenging for any leadership team, is to communicate with the local partners. That is, to identify local partners that may have similar interests as this group of Kelley students, but to align their interests, to understand their interests and their motivations, and then to communicate effectively what it is that the student team wants to do, and to understand sort of the world of the local partner. That takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of communication, a lot of understanding, and so that can be very challenging. And they didn't end up with the same partner that they attempted to contact. They didn't even end up going to the same country that they had planned to go. During this process, the country switched from El Salvador to Peru, and of course the choice of partners, the availability of partners, all of that shifted and changed, and so the leadership team has primary responsibility for identifying that partner. Of course, the curriculum is a very difficult and challenging piece because students are used to taking courses and they are used to experiencing the curriculum, but mainly as a student. It takes a different skill set to think of the curriculum in terms of designing it, crafting it, and what's required in terms of the challenge. Of course, the teamwork aspect, working as a team, is not something that comes natural or easy for a group of individuals or a collection of individuals. They need to do a lot of really hard work to begin working as a team, to understand each other, to understand their motivations, their different communication styles. So that's very challenging for any team. And another aspect that's very challenging in this type of experience that involves travel is that because of their role in the whole process, they're basically on call 24/7. If anything goes wrong, or if anybody gets sick, or there's a snag in the travel process, it's the leadership team that has primary responsibility, of course, with the help of the instructor and the school, but they are on the ground having to respond 24/7, so they don't get as much free time, let's say, as a regular student or other participants in the group. And finally, another aspect which is very challenging to any team is how to align the interests of their peers with the goals of the project. And a project like this involves a heck of a lot of hard work. And hard work when it's during the spring break format. And so that puts the leadership team in a really difficult position of enforcing the original work objectives, or making sure that everyone is paying attention to the deliverables and the objectives, even when individual motivations are shifting or people can get distracted. That puts the leadership team in the position of being a sort of a kind of a boss at the same time when they're working with their classmates as peers. And that can be very difficult when you don't have the traditional motivators to align people's behavior with what's expected. So it's very tricky. It takes some really highly developed and subtle leadership skills that the leadership team has to use. And I think one of the benefits of this experience is that it gives them, the leadership team, an opportunity to develop those softer skills, those more subtle skills within a class format in sort of a safe environment that's being supervised by a faculty member and the Kelley School of Business. They get an opportunity to develop those soft skills before they enter the work world, where those kinds of skills are at a premium and when the outcomes really, really matter. Why would I recommend such a program for potential MBA students or potential Kelley MBA students? I think there are two aspects here. One has to do with what the experience adds on top of a very good classroom experience. So what is it that the Globase experience adds on top of what works really well in the classroom? And then the other aspect has to do with how this type of an experience can help distinguish any MBA student from the masses or other people who don't have this experience, to make them more competitive in an interview situation or for potential employment. So this type of experience is very important because what it does is it extends the content that's provided in the classroom, and it provides another dimension. It focuses the attention of a student on real-world business problems, actual business problems, in a way that they would not, in a way that has more life than a case that's written up and covered for discussion in the classroom. There's a component here which can't be duplicated in the classroom, and that is the experience of doing the actual international business experience. The action of traveling to another country, interacting with the locals, interacting with business owners and stakeholders in another country. The space, the geographic limitations, make that possible. The geographic limitations of the classroom make it impossible in the classroom, and the travel part of this experience makes it possible, makes it doable. And so that's a very rich part of the experience. Of course, learning by doing. Anytime that someone can learn a concept intellectually, but actually put it into action and study it and analyze it from a distance or look at the final results, that's very rich, that's very powerful. That's the type of experience that tends to stick with somebody, and they can remember and they can use that for a very long time. Another aspect that's very important about this experience is that it's an opportunity to learn something that's very complex and that has many aspects to it, but learning in a safe environment where it's not in the workplace, or it's not learning with very harsh consequences of any mistakes that are made. The mistakes that might be made are seen as opportunities to take corrective action in the future. It's all done within a safe learning environment where the consequence is really about a grade, or it's really about personal improvement versus a deal that goes sour, or a relationship that goes sour, or something that has financial consequences, or other types of consequences. So in terms of the type of learning, I think this is very valuable for any MBA students. What does it add to them that allows them to distinguish themselves or to separate themselves from the crowd? I think it's a difficult experience, and not every MBA student is going to want to go through that extra work. First of all, it shows initiative. It shows that somebody was willing to do something that is difficult, that's not within their comfort zone, and so this may be an indicator that they would be willing to take on this type of initiative or this type of a challenge in the workplace. I think recruiters like that. I think employers are very attuned to identifying those rare individuals who have a lot more initiative than the masses. In terms of learning and experience, recruiters out there are looking for people who have good international business experience, because the reality is that a lot of business today is international. Business, the way that globalization is playing out today, a lot of business cuts across borders. It's not confined to just one country or even the domestic environment. It involves multiple countries, multiple languages, many cultures, different levels of technology. And so potential employees who have these experiences, I think, are very attractive to recruiters. Another aspect that companies might be very interested in is the fact that they're trying to identify people who have very solid, very sharp business skills, but they also want people who have a focus on corporate social responsibility. Those that want to make a difference by doing good, in addition to doing good business. Who is responsible, or who is interested in being socially responsible, being ethical, and being a good representative of their country, or a good global citizen as a result of going to the other side of the world, or going to many different countries. Also, recruiters are interested in folks who have a lot of real business experience. And so some MBA students may not have a lot of work experience, or they this is the type of rich, direct, real-world experience that can be very attractive to potential recruiters, that could look very good on a resume. So what did these Globase teams provide for the companies that might be of value or of interest to the companies? here's another area where this Globase 2009 group and the teams were very successful. The companies, I think, gained some tremendous benefits that they're eager to duplicate with another group. The easiest one to document is the fact that the students provided very good, very practical recommendations. The companies told us that. The fact that the students worked so closely with the companies, even before they went to Peru, allowed them to gather very good information and really know the company and know the industry that they were working with. And so the students provided very practical, very valuable recommendations for the companies. One thing that gave the students an advantage and that was very valuable to the companies is that the students are very good at understanding the U.S. market and finding information about the U.S. market, about U.S. business partners, and about how the legal system works in the U.S. and what the competition is like in the U.S. That's very difficult for Peruvian companies or for any company from outside of the U.S. to really understand. So the way that these projects were conducted, it played to the strength of the knowledge and experience that our students have of the U.S. market. So the practical recommendations involving understanding of the U.S. market was very valuable. Beyond that, what's very valuable to the companies is that they get a brand new perspective. They get a very fresh perspective that's very different than the perspective of someone who's been working in the industry for a long time or within the firm for a long time. So it's kind of an out-of-the-box thinking effect that takes place. And it often amazes me at how valuable this is for companies. And so they told us that the work of the students was fresh thinking. It was very good creative thinking and recommendations by young people who are not constrained to the old or the usual paradigms of their firm or of the particular industry, and they need that. As several of these companies told me, they said that what our students did for them was to breathe new life and new energy into some very tired business plans that they had been kicking around for a long time. And so the students provided that fresh perspective, that energy, that out-of-the-box thinking, and motivation to move forward with implementing the recommendations that our students were offering that were very good, that were very solid, but that motivation and that energy is very important to managers directing the activities of a firm like this and the strategy of a firm like these 5 companies had in Peru.